Greetings from Alaska. This is Fred. Wee hours of the morning here. Just staying on top of things. I'm running behind as far as these shares go. Now, what I wanted to share with you today, it comes from Tom and Jory. Their brothers separated by about 10 years. This incident occurred 18 years ago. Now, Tom reached out to me and then had his brother Jory reach out to me separately about 2 weeks apart, right? And again, all those that I've talked to and you're waiting for me to get back to you, please bear with me. I'm a one-man show and I got multiple calls and stuff, so I'm juggling it, so please be patient. So what Tom shared was he was up here 20 years ago. He bought himself a little Super Cub. He had saved up money. He wanted to be a bush pilot. He wanted to, basically fly for a guide just to see the world and see Alaska. Well, when he initially got here 20 years ago, he flew for a couple years and didn't really like the other people's schedule and stuff. And so, he walked away. He made substantial money, you know what I mean? But it's not what he envisioned, because all he was doing was constantly flying and he had very little time to be out in the back country, right? So after a couple of years he walks away and he flies back down to the States with his plane. And the following spring, his younger brother Joey was in town visiting, and he had he was taking a sabbatical from his job. So he brought up, hey, how was Alaska? And Tom was like, you know what? How about I show you? Two brothers, they're like, hell yeah, let's do it. So they plan it all out. They get up here, and when they arrive in Anchorage, they spend about a week just kind of flying around here, flying back from there, just checking the area out, and they decide, let's go out. So they rolled out a map, picked a spot off the Kuskokwim River, actually north of the Kuskokwim River, and it's a little valley up there, and it's right south of Von Frank Mountain. Now, they picked that name because they thought it sounded funny and out of place for Alaska, and so they were like, that's the spot we want to go to. So they make all their provisions and everything, and they had to make a couple stops along the way for fuel and whatnot, because it is just a Super Cub, So he had his wing tanks, belly tank, and that kind of thing. And with a Super Cub, you're limited on weight, So they traveled light. They brought the minimums. They had of course, they had a shotgun, and Jory had a 44 Magnum. So their plan was, we're gonna land out there. We're gonna have a great time as brothers. We're gonna have an excellent time. Which, I mean, hey, it's remote Alaska. It's beautiful, you know what I mean? So once they make it to a spot, they find a landing area that's suitable. They had to fly low back and forth a few times, wind direction and checking for obstructions on the ground and stuff, stuff any bush pilot would do. So they find their spot and they land. And so they set up camp right there. Right there next to the plane. They set up their camp, and for 2 days they just kind of went up and down the Von Frank Creek, back and forth, and then there's Flat Creek. And they were just kind of looking around, so they decided on day 3, let's go up that little valley there on the south side of Von Frank Mountain. Now they got their day packs. They brought extra food in case they had to spike camp out there because of weather or what have you. In the morning they take off to go up this little valley, this little canyon, real tight valley. From what they said, the vegetation was thick. They basically went up the creek, you know what I mean, just because that was the only open area where they weren't fighting the brush. So as they're ascending and going along, they hear a noise. And I'll pull up the map here in just a minute, but at this area they hear their first noise, and it was odd. He said it sounded like a mournful kind of yawn, and it was very loud, very, very pronounced. And they kind of looked at each other like, what was that, a bear yawning? Because, you know, when Tom was up doing the flying for guiding, he never heard a bear. He never heard a moose call. He was too busy flying back and forth and sleeping in between. So, you know, they sit there amongst each other, kind of like, that must be a bear yawning. We'll be on our, you know, we'll mind our P's and Q's, and we'll continue on. So they ascend further, and, you know, they get another few hundred feet in elevation, cutting back up, because from their vantage point, what they could see was kind of a bowl up at the top. But in actuality, once you got up there, there's a valley that kicked off, you know, to the southeast. They didn't know that at the time. I mean, they were flying around and stuff, but they were paying attention to a landing area, and not necessarily, oh, once we get up there, because they initially didn't plan on going up there. So anyway, they get to this elevation a few hundred feet more, and they hear that yawning sound again. But he said it was a yawn, and then at the end of that mournful yawn was a high-pitched squeal, and then it went dead quiet. Like, now, the weather conditions at the time was a low ceiling, so they're ascending up into the clouds, basically, because they could not see the top of Von Frank Mountain. So they kind of look at each other, and Jory is like, I don't know what the hell that was. Maybe it was some kind of owl. They're spitballing because they don't know, but then, you know, they're sitting there debating back and forth. That was too loud for this, too much for that. So they're like, well, let's just continue on. Maybe we'll come across some new species. And they laughed. You know, they're like, oh yeah, we're the adventurers that are going to find some lost species of weird bird. And they were joking amongst each other, trying to lighten the mood, because there was something real off and eerie about that noise, but they didn't feel any initial sense of danger. So they continue on up, and then they reach this point where the one valley they came up, the little small valley, the one they came up met with that one that ran to the southeast, right? And then it continued off to their, slightly off to their left, continuing on an incline, and they stopped at that point. Now, when they stop there, they decide we'll eat lunch here, and they make themselves, they boil up some water. They were eating top ramen and can of chili mac, you know, just basic quick meals, you know, for energy. So they cook that up, and they're eating it, and there's a little trickle of water where they're washing stuff out when they're done. Well, Jory was over 25 feet away at this, basically it's a spring at that point, you know what I mean? And he's rinsing stuff out, and he's looking around, and the ceiling just seems like it's coming lower and lower as far as the clouds, and it's getting real hard to see, like a dense fog, right? But they're basically up where the clouds are. And so he's sitting there rinsing the stuff out, and Tom heard something off towards that southeast little canyon dropping back down, and he hears noises like rocks clacking and stuff, you know, like something moving along. So he gets Jory's attention, saying, hey, sounds like something large back up over here, a little distance away. We're at a good distance, but something's moving in the rocks. I can hear him. Jory was like, okay, you know, we'll pay attention or whatever. He finishes what he's doing. As he turns around and starts walking back towards Tom, all of a sudden, further up off to where, you know, it branches off to the left there, because they come up and then it branches off to the left, and then the other canyon drops back down to the right. Well, up off to the left, he said the loudest air siren scream he had ever heard, and he had never heard it before, but it was like an air raid siren, but it started low, pretty classic sound, and ramped up to a very high pitched, and he said as soon as that high pitch ended, there was 3 loud whoops, real loud, whoop, 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 and it reverberated all around them. You know, they're basically up in this semi-quasi bowl right up at the face of the mountain, you know. And so it echoed around real loudly. They immediately were like, what the hell is that? What was that? You know, because Bigfoot, Hairy Man, none of that stuff was on their mind. They knew nothing about it. They had heard, you know, all the stuff over the years from different shows or whatever, but none of it wasn't even in their wheelhouse. So Jory scrambles back over by Tom, and he's putting stuff away because immediately Jory's like, we need to go. And Tom's not arguing. He was like, yeah, let's gather up the stuff. Because they took one of their day packs and they spread out their stuff with the stove, and they had a little fire going and stuff. And so they had to sit there and, take care of their little area. They didn't want to cause a wildfire or whatever. So Tom said as they were doing that, and Tom is the one looking around. And again, low ceiling. The cloud was basically touching the mountain. It was down almost on top of them to where they couldn't see anything very well. It was like being in super dense fog. And so they're like, all right, let's get going. As Jory's packing up this stuff, they hear the second noise. And he said the second scream was identical to the first, just a shorter version and only 2 whoops. And so that got their attention quickly. And so they're hearing movement over from where this second noise came from. But again, the clouds are so thick, they're looking through this dense fog. And as they're looking, they noticed this dark spot back up in the fog where they could barely make it out, but they could tell it's moving. And it's kind of quasi-moving towards them, but kind of parallel to the mountain, but moving closer towards them. And they can hear the rocks and stuff, from where this thing was moving. And so they're immediately like, hurry up, let's get, as they're donning their packs and everything, and they're focused on this second noise back behind them, up a shorter little cut, literally back behind them, not that far off, they hear the third noise, which was just a couple whoops, and then a high-pitched whistle sound. He said it almost came across between a mix between a high-pitched woman's scream and a very loud whistle. He said it was real hard to like verbalize exactly what it was. That immediately they whip around, and again, that dense fog, they could not really make out what was going on. So now they feel like they're surrounded, right? Now they kind of just talked amongst each other and said, hey, let's keep things, let's just hold our ground here, because where they happen to be was open enough to where they can see around. You're okay, Tank. You're okay. Sorry, my dog was having a bad dream there. So, Tank, you're okay. You're okay. Hey. Silly dope. So, they're feeling surrounded. They're up on this. There was more of a rise behind them, but they're on an open face with very little vegetation immediately around them. So they felt like they had enough response time for whatever in the hell. So they're basically squatted down. They got their packs on. Tom has the shotgun. Jory has his .44 Magnum, and they're just sitting there quietly. Well, as the day progresses, they sat there. They sat there for, Tom said, about an hour and a half before they heard the next noise. And the next noise was again from those 3 spots, but they were just a little bit closer. And I asked, well, what determined they were a little bit closer? Because again, thick fog and all that, it was real dense. It was basically being in the clouds. And so Tom said that it was evidently closer because the loudness, the way it reverberated, they could tell it was closer. And during certain points they could hear movement, especially on that side where they heard the second noise. There's a lot of rock movement from this thing moving across where there was, rocks that sloughed down. He said they got really freaked out about the 3rd hour because all of a sudden rocks were not big ones, he said they were about the size of walnuts, and they were coming in from that second noise area. So these rocks are raining in, not at a fast pace or anything like that, but on a regular cadence, just crack, 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 And so they're like, all right, let's get moving. So what they do is they decide, we'll just walk slowly, we'll stay low, and we'll go back down. So as they start to make their movement, all of a sudden, just below them, on their trail back down, they hear a whoop. And then from the area of the first whoop, they hear another one, which is a lot closer. So they're really feeling boxed in now. They got these rocks falling and these noises a lot closer. Well, as they were kind of backing back up to almost to their original position, they squat back down and they're listening, and they can hear brush movement off to their left, they can hear brush movement in front of them, and they can hear these rocks and stuff off to their right. So they got these 3 points, and they feel boxed in. And Tom said it felt like a standoff. He said he felt like he was being manipulated to stay where they were. And he said it was the oddest feeling. And I was like, well, was there any... I mean, you're hearing these noises. That doesn't necessarily mean it's a standoff. You know what I mean? Like, you chose that spot. And he goes, well, when we started moving, all of a sudden, these noises were coming in like... he said it wasn't what we could hear, it's what you couldn't hear, it's what you felt. And he felt like they were being kind of herded to stay in this one area. And I said, well, you know, herding is one thing, but what's the standoff? He goes, well, we had guns and we were standing. I said, oh, okay, fair enough. Fair enough. And so he said as they sat there, they could hear movement. You know, they weren't seeing quite anything. The most they saw so far was that dark spot in the fog bank, right? Or in the cloud, basically. And the noises of moving. But he said it's not like they were circling by any means. It was just noise from there, and noise from there, and noise from over here. And it was never in order, per se. It was just different noises. They would hear branches and small brush cracking over here to their left. In front of them, same thing, and to the right it was always the rocks. So when they ascended up to that point before the cloud really started coming down on them, Tom noticed that, you know, across the little valley there was a rock line before it reached vegetation, right? So hearing this thing moving in the rocks, he knew it wasn't below into the tree lines. It was always making noise on the rocks. So he felt comfortable with where that one was, or what was over there, because it was at a safe distance. However, these branch breaking noises and stuff off in front of them and off to their left, those seemed like they were kind of getting closer and closer, just incrementally. He said at the point they decided to really make a go was about going on 4 hours into just like listening and whispering amongst each other, and you know, freaking out like, what the hell is this crap, you know? He said a couple of times just before they decided to really make a break, they started yelling out, hey, this ain't funny, you don't play games, we're armed, you know, that whole bit. Well, he said that every time they yelled out, they would hear this weird mumbling. Tom said he had heard Yupik just from flying around in remote Alaska getting fuel and stuff. He would hear Yupik now and then, and he knew nothing about the dialects or anything, but he said some of the mumbling resembled that. It sounded different, it sounded a little weird and off, but that was the closest he could associate it with anything, right? He said what really sparked them saying, screw this, we're out regardless, was off to their left, rocks started coming in. The rocks that initially were thrown were just kind of landing near them, right? Landing near them. So when the rocks came in from the left, they were hitting in the backpacks. They had their backpacks on, they had the high board backs, and these rocks were hitting in these areas pretty hard. And none directly in the head or shoulder or anything, but hitting the packs. And so immediately they look at each other and said, screw this, you know, let's go. So they commenced to going down and then cutting back to their back trail. Now on the back trail, you got to understand, it's not a walk in the park. There's drops and little spots where there's small falls and stuff like this. So they're literally jamming down this little little tight valley, quasi canyon, having to climb back out along the edge and then drop back down past these spots that have drops, and where when spring melt off is coming, it's basically a waterfall in that spot, right? And they're doing all this in pretty dense fog, and they can't see horribly far around them. And so he said once they got down there a ways, they could hear the one that was initially across from them to their left kind of coming in behind them as they're making their way down. He said a couple times they had stopped, they would hear rocks and clamoring above them, and they couldn't make anything out or see anything, so they said screw it, turn around. They kept going. Now, he said once they finally got out of there, more towards the base, of the south side there of the Von Frank Mountain, they calmed down because there hadn't been noise in a while. And so as they were sitting there talking, like, oh wow, that is crazy, they're looking around still because they're hyper. I would be too. They're hyper paranoid, but they're not hearing anything anymore. And as Jory's facing north, and Tom is right off to his, just in front of him, off to the left a little bit. As Jory's talking to Tom, Tom's facing south, Jory's facing north, back up. He's facing up this little valley, and they're talking. All of a sudden, Jory gets hit with a small rock center chest, and it came out of nowhere. He was looking up that direction. Tom was looking, at his brother, and this rock just hit him. And again, it was very foggy and stuff, and so it was basically socked in weather. So when he got hit with the rock, they immediately, their eyes both got big. They turned around and continued. They got back to their camp, and they're socked in at this point. They can't fly. Tom said they sat there basically they took turns sleeping. One would climb in the cub and sleep with nothing in it. The other one would be outside on guard when they did sleep. They had to sit there 2 days. Nothing happened within those 2 days. Nothing happened once they got off the mountain. However, it was dead quiet for 2 days, and they basically took turns keeping watch. And he said that he hasn't been back to Alaska since, and he has no interest in coming back to Alaska. When I spoke to Jory, he said out of everything that happened, even the rocks hitting the backpack, it was really freaky, but he said he didn't really feel his life was in danger till the one rock hit him in the center of the chest, which is weird, but that's what he felt. You know what I mean? I want to thank Tom. From what he said, he had typed out an email a couple different times or whatever, and then never sent it, and just called me. I want to thank him for his time in reaching out and the process in which I share these with you guys. After that 2 days of being socked in, as soon as there was a wormhole, as we call it, to see blue sky above, he fired up and got out of there, but hasn't been back to Alaska. All his buddies that have brought up going to Alaska, he's shared this with, and they had just all kind of look at him like, everyone has their own views, so when you tell somebody something like this, some people are going to be like, that's interesting, and other people are going to be like, you're full of shit. But regardless, I want to thank them for sharing. I'm trying to remember if there's anything else. Nothing else offhand that I could think of at the moment. And we'll catch you guys on the next one.